Good afternoon and welcome from London. Good morning and good evening for those visiting us from all over the globe. It is lovely to have you on the call this afternoon for our second part of the London Summer Business Series, Strategy for the New Normal. Whatever that is, John, I'm looking forward to it. Just for introduction's sake, my name is Katie Keith. I'm the Executive Director here at the Global Chamber of Commerce in London. And I'm really quite happy to be here today because I'm always curious about what the future of work holds, just in general, but even more so post-pandemic. And so that's why I've been really excited and delighted to actually thank you, John Courtney, who is a CEO and founder for Boardroom Advisors, for supporting the Global Chamber in our first summer business series to share your valuable insights on what the strategy for the new normal might look like for us business owners out there in a post-pandemic world. So just for those who don't know John and weren't able to come to the first part of the series, John and his global team provide real-world board advisors, part-time CEOs, MDs, non-exec directors, chairmen, and paid mentors for scale-ups and SMEs. The team offers services from a 1 day per quarter with no recruitment fees and no long-term commitments in an interchangeable personnel as your needs change, which I think is very important, actually. John brings with him today a world of experience, and I'm looking very much forward to hearing more from you. Now, John, over to you to share a bit more.
Great. Thanks very much, Katie. I take it you can hear me okay. And hello, welcome. It's good afternoon from England. Welcome to my conservatory in cloudy Bristol, England. So wherever you are today, welcome. Let me share my screen and with no further ado, put up some slides. Katie, just confirm that you can see those okay. Thank you very much. We have practiced this before, but you never know, do you? So what we're going to cover today is business strategy, how to analyze options in the new normal, whatever that means, thank you, and to create an actionable plan. There's no point just thinking about, what ifs and vague directions. Actually, we need a plan in order to take things forward. So let me try and move my slides on without any success at all. That's brilliant. Let me do it the manual way then. Okay, so some housekeeping bits. So we do have some free downloads available both during and at the end of the webinar. So do wait for those and perhaps jot the details down or whatever you need to. And I think, Katie, the slides are going out to everybody at the end.
They sure are.
Thank you so much. So you'll be able to track it through there as well. Do please put your contact details in the chat, so Katie and I and other people on the webinar can get in touch with you. This is partly about networking, of course. That's what Global Chamber is. And if you have any questions, we'll do them at the end rather than ruin the flow. But please put your questions in the chat when you think of them. And then at the end we'll tackle them, and then it's not tumbleweed when I suddenly say, anybody got any questions, and nobody has any at that stage. So as you go, please, that would be great. Just stick them in there and then Katie will field them and we'll go from there. Right, so that's the housekeeping. Just a tiny bit about Boardroom Advisors. It's the only bit of advertising, I suppose. Boardroom Advisors, what do we do? As Katie said, part-time directors, all types, finance, sales, marketing. You see the list there, even managing directors, also chairs, non-execs, advisors, and mentors. So we have 100, actually over 100 very senior advisors. They have all scaled businesses, and we help clients scale theirs. And our clients are funded startups, scale-ups, the people who invest in them, that is the VCs and private equity, and of course a big rump of growing SMEs. And our people are available immediately, not on the notice period, completely flexible, with no long-term contract and no recruitment fee because they're all on our teams. It's all on a day rate. We're based in the UK, but we're expanding worldwide. So we have representation in Ireland, Portugal, Spain, India, and we're looking to expand further overseas. So one of the reasons that we partner with Global Chamber is it's great for global networking. So okay, that's all about us. End of advert. Let's move on. So let's have a look at strategic direction. So I had the great honor, I suppose. I trained as a strategy consultant many years ago now, 25 years ago probably, and it was illuminating. You know, this is my 7th business, and I think that was after business number 4 or 5. I can't remember now. And my gosh, you know, I wish I'd known some of the strategy stuff then when I was growing those early businesses. And it's not rocket science. I think people, in my humble opinion, I think people overcomplicate strategy. I remember before I went to learn about strategy myself, I went to the library, and I looked at all these books on strategy, and they were all this thick, and they were so complicated. I opened them up, and it's like, oh, there's this theory and that theory, and oh, this matrix and that matrix, and my gosh, did it make it sound really complicated. Mainly, I think, because they were written by academics. Nothing wrong with academics, don't get me wrong, but I like to keep strategy simple. And strategy for me is mainly about where are you now, where do you want to get to, and then how is the best way to get from A to B. Nice and simple. The slide I put up here is really just, these are some of the things that that we go through with clients when we're talking about strategy, and we might have, you know, it might be a board table, or, you know, I'm at a flip chart with the board members, whatever it is. So we kind of ask some simple questions. Do you discuss strategy or strategic direction? Bit mouthful. Who talks about it? How do you analyze it? And do you do this as a group, you know, as a board? Do you have a non-exec director who helps you? You know, how do you go about that particular process? And a lot of companies honestly mix up strategy and tactics, and strategy is a much bigger picture. And you know, it's a bit like I suppose driving an ocean liner. You know, strategy is about the big direction. You know, you're going from here to Africa or whatever it is. And the tactics sometimes are, you know, there's some sharks over there, we need to just steer a tiny bit left. You need the granularity of tactics on a day-to-day basis, and that's what I guess management meetings are for. Strategy is really what a board is for. The board is there to decide and implement the strategy and direction of the company. That's its main purpose. The management team, sometimes a management board or whatever, but the management, the day-to-day management is there to perhaps look at tactical stuff as well. And some of the people are in both places. And that's possibly one of the reasons why it gets a little confusing. But now we're in a position of crisis through COVID. Then, you know, looking at the big picture and making sure we've got our strategy, our overall direction going in the right way, checking that what we had before COVID is now still applicable, or actually if we have to turn this ocean liner, is it just a few degrees, or actually is it a proper pivot, as they say in today's world? So it's just kind of thinking through some of those questions. And strategy, as it says on the slide, gives you a clear purpose, and it gives you some objectives. Now we're going to use some management tools. Don't groan, I hear, but management tools are brilliant because strategy is really tough if you don't have some management tools to use. You know, if you don't, it's kind of like trying to nail a cloud to a wall. It's really nebulous. There's a pun in there somewhere, I think. Anyway, so we're going to look at 3 different tools. We're going to look at an old favorite, which is SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You've probably heard about it. You've probably done it in the past. That's absolutely fine. We're going to whiz through it quickly. We're going to just refresh things because it's a really useful tool even today, years after its invention, if that's the right word. But it doesn't, what it does, it gets lots of issues out on the table, which is great, but it doesn't do anything with them. Once they're on the table, they just sit there looking at you. So you kind of need something in order to move it forward. And that's what most analysis does. It then moves those issues forward, looks at options, decides tactics and ownership and timescales and all the stuff that actually moves things on. So I'm a great believer, and with clients, we do this all the time, every week. We're doing a combo of SWOT and MOST. Now, MOST you probably haven't come across. We'll cover it in a bit more detail in a moment. In the middle there, I've put in a crisis assessment tool. So this is really, you do a SWOT analysis, but it's the crisis assessment tool. It's just a set of simple questions, is about just double checking that everything that you thought about in your SWOT analysis is still current given COVID. And you can use this crisis assessment for other crises if we were using it back in the financial crisis 2008. I'm sure regretfully there'll be another one. So it's just useful to check things. So we'll cover those 3 tools today, and as I say, we have free downloads on all of those to help you in your business on a day-to-day basis. If you need further assistance, strategic direction is the thing we do most of. So, right, no further ado, let's have a quick whiz through SWOT. So what is SWOT? You can see from the blue rectangles here, it's strengths and weaknesses, which are internal things, and opportunities and threats, which are external. And these things are either helpful to achieving the objectives or harmful to achieving objectives. And so what's really good with SWOT analysis is to brainstorm this in a group. You can do it individually. You can sit down with a piece of paper. You can do these things for a personal basis as well, not just your company. But if you're a very small business and, one-man band, that's great. You can just get out your piece of paper and do it. If you're a company, or, particularly of some size, then best done as a group, best having somebody to facilitate that, a non-exec director or board advisor or whatever you have, because they can just help you brainstorm, they can help you sense check, and just draw things out. And sometimes when you get a list, we generally do this one by one, and we'd have a flip chart and strengths, and I'd be jotting them down as people shout out around the table. You use brainstorming tactics. So that means you just shout out what comes top of the head. You don't criticize, you don't analyze. Nobody says, oh, that's a rubbish idea. You just get it out there, okay? Proper brainstorming stuff. Everything goes down until people run dry. And this isn't for the facilitator or the NED or the advisor to be saying what should be on the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's for the company to decide, because they're the ones doing it. But when you've got a list down there of the strengths, then some of them will be big ones, I would say strong ones, but they're strengths, and others will be a bit thin. But maybe if you combine 2 together, they become a bit of a bigger one. So you want to, and at that point, when you've gone through the list and people have dried up, then you can analyze and criticize and kick things out and combine things and so on. But you've then got a list of strengths, and you do exactly the same with the weaknesses. Often with companies, the strengths are are more difficult, and it's sometimes easier. You know, I often say to clients, what is it you go home and kick the cat about? What is it you want to write a letter to the boss about? Get everything down there. What are the weaknesses? But remember, these strengths and weaknesses are internal things. It's about your company. It's about inside your business. It's very easy to get mixed up between internal and external, and that's part of the facilitator's job to keep that on track. Opportunities, again, these should be external opportunities, not an opportunity we can design a new product. That's something internal, isn't it? So what external opportunities are there? For example, what opportunities does COVID pull up for you? And other issues, you know, it might be Brexit if you're in the UK, or whatever, any change. And you can go through, you know, political and economic and social and so on, various things, triggers, as it were, to look at the external things that might create opportunities or indeed threats. And again, with both of these, you do the list, you get everybody, get everything down there. Then after everybody's dry, you analyze, criticize, kick out the rubbish, join up the weak ones into stronger ones. And then you've then got, you know, a robust list that is designed by the people who run the business, not designed by an outsider. So that's SWOT, and then you have a pretty good picture, and it won't have told you anything you don't know, maybe the odd thing, but it's kind of highlighted some issues maybe. But you want to do something with that in order to create action and to create change. But before we do that, we want to, before I even do that, there's a download here of the SWOT analysis. These are relatively simple forms, but allows you just to do it on a computer and on a screen, or you can do a whiteboard, but then you have to write it up afterwards. So it just makes life a lot easier. So you've got a SWOT analysis, or you've done a SWOT analysis in the past, but then how is that relevant to the current situation? Now, this is our crisis strategy assessment. I should think of easier words to say. So this is just a set of logical questions. It's a bit like an onion, I suppose, that you're peeling off layers and trying to get further down. So first of all, defining the crisis. Well, at the moment, that's relatively simple. We've got COVID, and things have shut down, and in the UK we're coming out, and the US are starting to come out, and hopefully Europe as well. But in your situation, you know, where are you? What's likely to change in the world as a result of COVID? And you know, there's lots of programs out there. There's lots of discussion. Some of the obvious things, you know, perhaps people will work more from home. Perhaps companies will need less offices. These are some obvious things, but perhaps there are less obvious ones. So, you know, it's just jotting these things down. Again, you can do it as a brainstorm, whiteboard, or you can do it on a computer, whatever. And peel back the layers again. So what's likely to change in your industry? You know, your industry as distinct from others' industry. And how might this affect your revenue streams? Will it affect your value proposition? And this is really important. We covered this on the previous webinar about growth. And if you want a copy of that, if you don't have one, then do tell Katie, she'll forward that on to you. But your value proposition is all about where, you know, why should people buy from you? What is it that's different about you and your company and your services that makes people buy from you? What do you do differently? Now, what's really important when you have a big situation like COVID is your value proposition going to change? Again, back to the line of the ocean liner, you know, that's, you're going from here to there. Is that right? Do you have to alter it? Do you have to pivot completely? Really important, because if you need to make a change and you don't make a change, you're going to get left behind pretty quickly by people who have pivoted in some degree. It might not be necessary. One of the things, you know, we've been talking to a lot of clients, And some of them are completely well, nobody's completely unaffected, but mainly unaffected by COVID. Some have financially benefited from COVID because of the goods or services that they do. Others have been damaged, sadly, by the process. So it's just reevaluating your value proposition. Does it have to change? Not necessarily, but ask the question. And how will this alter your customer segments and relationships? If you're selling to segment A, let's say, retired people before, is this still the same customer segment that you're going for? Do you have the same types of relationships? Were you going direct or indirect before? Should that change? It's just thinking through everything fundamentally that you do in your business to see if it should change. What about your distribution channels and your partners? Do you need more partners? Do you need different distribution channels? What about your resource needs? We talked about offices before and perhaps finance. What other resources do you need in your business? What do you need to get in place? And what about your cost structure? Is that going to be affected? We talked about offices and so on. So just thinking through these various things. You know, this is just a management tool. This is it. This is the download. I'll come to where you can get these in a bit. So it's just a Q&A thing. It's not rocket science, but it just gives you something in order to work through, like a workbook, really. Right. Okay, so we've looked at SWOT. We've checked our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and our value prop, and all the rest of it, according to the current crisis, which is COVID. So now we have these issues on the table from SWOT. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to change, and how are we going to change? And this is the critical bit. And you know, while SWOT is very much an old favorite, MOST is not something that's that known. It's similar, I think, to, well, I know it's similar to OKRs. It's kind of the grandfather of OKRs, if people know that. So let's just talk through it. So MOST, bottom left hand, is mission. So this is the organization's purpose. And I don't mean a vision and we're going to be the best and we're going to change, you know, we're talking about business basics. So sales and turnover is a great place to start. Don't make this overcomplicated. So you need to kind of work out where you are at the moment. So, you know, go back to your financial documents. You know, what was your turnover and your profit last year or pre-COVID, or whatever situation you want to benchmark, and then say, well, okay, what is it you want to achieve and in which timescale? Timescale is important because what you want to achieve in 1 year, what you want to achieve in 5 years may be very different. So choose a timescale. A year is good. And I do recommend companies do a MOST analysis at least once a year. Once a quarter, it depends on the size of the company, but once a quarter is probably better for large companies, maybe every half a year for smaller ones, definitely at least once a year. So fix a timescale. Some people, larger companies, maybe do 2 timescales. What do I want to achieve sales and turnover in 1 year and in 3 years? You know, the old days of doing 10-year plans is, you know, that's kind of gone by the wayside, isn't it? That seems such old school now. Forgive me if you have a 10-year plan, but setting the direction, setting the what it is you want to achieve is really, really important. Because, just to choose an analogy, if actually in 3 years' time you want to grow your business by 3%, you don't need to do very much. If, however, in 1 year you want to double your business, actually you have to do a whole heap. So setting that direction is really important in terms of the scale at which you do things, and also the options that you have in order to do them. So what you do is you go around the MOST analysis and you take them one by one. So, and everything should hang together between each of them. So you go from mission to the O, which is objectives. So you've stated you want to, let's say you want to increase by 50% sales and margin, keep it simple, in the next year, right? So what key goals are going to help you get there? What are the objectives? Now, that's very difficult to think of in isolation. You end up just scratching your head and it's like, so the place to go back to is where you first started. Go back to your SWOT analysis, because these will set your objectives. So go back to each one of them, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and mark up the big ones. For example, strengths. What's the, you don't want too many here, but so if you take strengths, what's the biggest strength that you have that you mustn't lose? Because if you lose that, you lose your USP, as we used to call it in the old days, or the core to your value proposition in today's language. What is it that's right at the heart of your business that you must not lose? Mark it up. Have a look at the weaknesses. Now, with weaknesses, you might want to choose 2 or even 3, because unless you change some of those weaknesses, you're unlikely to grow the business. So have a look perhaps at 2. Let's keep life simple. What are the 2 biggest weaknesses in your business that will stop you achieving your mission? Remember, you're trying to move your mission on here. So have a look. And it may be, for example, this is just an example, it may be that you have a perceived weakness in your financial strength. Now, that's an example. And you've decided this is quite a big thing because perhaps some big clients aren't using you as a supplier because they don't feel you're financially sound. Just an example. And if you've marked that up as a big weakness, then that's absolutely fine, because we'll cover how to deal with that in the next bit, which is the strategies. So stick with the objectives just for a moment. Try and keep it simple. 1, the biggest strength, couple of weaknesses, couple of opportunities, because they can drive things forward, and 1 real big nasty that can actually threaten your business. So then you've got 6 things. You don't have too many objectives, or you're trying to bite off more than you can chew. You could always go back and create more at a later time. Let's start with the 6. So for each one of those objectives, you have to move on to the strategy and do something with it. So what are strategies? Strategies are options in order to achieve those objectives. So let's take the example that we had. So your perceived weaknesses of financial strength. So what are your options? Strategies are options. If you ever want to think about the difference between a strategy and a tactic, then strategies are options. Tactics are how you do things. So take that example. What are the options? And you brainstorm again. Come on. What are we going to do? What are the options here? Well, perceived financial weakness. So what you want to do is actually, I've missed a bit, because what you want to do in your objective is once you've worked out this particular weakness, you want to convert that into an objective just by turning it backwards on itself and giving it a reason. So with that one, your objective would be to improve our perceived financial strength. You just turned it backwards, haven't you? But there has to be a why. Why are you doing it? So that we can acquire more big customers. That's your objective in that particular example. Then you come to the strategies. So what are your options? Whiteboard. Come on, what can we do? What can we do to change our perceived financial weakness into what can we change that into a strength? Okay, so you can get a part-time finance director. Obviously, that will be top of my list. So that's one option. You might want to go get some funding. There's 2 options. There may be half a dozen around the table, and you go through and analyze and work out, which one or possibly 2 that you might want to implement. because those are options to achieve the objective. So in that example, just remember the weakness was perceived financial strength. We've converted that into an objective by turning it on itself. The objective becomes to improve the perception of financial strength. I've worded that slightly differently, but you get the gist. And why are you doing it? In order that we can get bigger clients. And then perhaps you've got two options you're going to cover. You're going to get a part-time financial director, and you're going to look at getting some funding. So those are the options that you're going to. Now, the acid test is, with these strategies, if those are achieved, if you get that part-time finance director and if you get some funding, are you likely to have achieved your objective? So that's the acid test as to whether you've got something of sense up there on the whiteboard. Let's assume we have. So we've got the strategies, and then for each of those strategies, in order to take them from theory into practice, we're still in theory. Oh, we need to do this. Yeah, great. We need to decide who's going to do what and by when. So this is tactics are how the strategies will be put into action. So what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? So let's take a part-time finance director. So who's going to do it? Okay, let's say the chairman sticks up his hand. Yeah, okay, I know a bit about this area. I'm going to talk to some suppliers, hopefully including Boardroom Advisors. So he's stuck his hand up. And then what time scale? Well, I'll start next month. I want to conclude it the month afterwards. Fine. You've got an owner and you've got a time scale. And he's decided what he's going to do. He's going to speak to several suppliers. Perhaps it's the second one is funding, and perhaps a non-exec director sticks his hand up. He knows some crowdfunding platforms. And he thinks that's a good way of doing it, and he's going to do it. Great, Fred, you're going to do it. What's your time scale? Okay, you want to complete this in 4 months. And how much do you want to raise? How much do we need to raise in order to change this perception of financial weakness? 500,000, million, 2 million. So you're just nailing that down. What's going to be done? Who's going to do it? What's the time scale? Now, what happens is, once you've done that, there are things on people's to-do lists. They're task lists or tactics. It's all T's, isn't it? So those things go on the non-exec director's list and the chairman's list, and they're likely to get done, and they've got timescales on them. And this is all going to be minuted. We've got a whole way of tracking this, which I'll show you in a second, so that when you come back to review the MOST analysis, somebody's going to say to the chairman, how are you getting on finding the part-time finance director? To the non-exec, how are you getting on getting that minimum funding? You said it'd be done by now, so people are accountable because it's on their task list and it's also on the review list. So that's all sounds good, but of course things aren't always as you. Oh, thank you. I wasn't asking for applause, Katie, but it's very kind of you. But obviously things don't go according to plan. Nothing ever goes according to plan, does it? So the ship goes off course. The rudder leaks, whatever. I don't know. What do you do? Well, the great thing about MOST analysis, there are two great things. One is that there are things on people's task lists and timescales, and things get done, which is brilliant. But the other great thing is, when things go wrong, you've got somewhere to go back to. So let's say the tactics aren't working. Well, you're doing a review. Well, so come on, how's it going with the finance director? Well, we've tried a couple. They were rubbish. I think, that's really not happening. Okay. So what about the funding? Well, investors aren't interested. That's going nowhere. Oops. Right. So now, instead of just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, you've got somewhere to go back to, because you can go back a level. You can go back to the strategy level. So, okay, remember we had the whiteboard, we've got the picture here, or we've got them on the slides that you'll see in a minute. These were the options we looked at. Now the first two we've looked at and we've tried these and it's not working. So what about the other things that we had on that list? Should we look at some of those other things? Should we brainstorm again? Should we go back and try other suppliers, other people, other ways of doing those first two things we looked at? It gives you somewhere to go back to reassess the direction in which you were going. Because things go wrong, you need to go back. And it stops that, if you don't have a structure like this, what happens is, you jump from A to C straight away. It's like, perceived financial weakness. Right, well, let's go get some funding. Okay, we've tried to get some funding. That hasn't worked. Oh, yeah. Okay, back to the drawing board, chaps. What do we do now? You've gone straight to a dead end. You've gone straight to a result. It hasn't worked, and then it's a dead end. This gives you somewhere to go back to check your thought process and the logic and have things changed, and can you try other options? And that's if the tactics don't work. Sometimes you look at the strategies and say, well, actually, guys, this is falling apart. This isn't working because our strategic thinking was faulty. We didn't have enough information. Markets moved, whatever. Well, that's fine. Just go back to your objectives. Always go back a level if it doesn't quite work. So were the objectives right? Yes, they were. Great. Well, let's have a look at some alternative strategies. Now actually things have changed, so the objective isn't quite right. It gives you somewhere to go back to, even back to the mission. We said we'd do 50% growth in 12 months. Is that really going to happen? Well, perhaps we need to reassess that too. So that's kind of MOST analysis. And listen, I spent probably most of the year learning how to do MOST analysis. So hopefully this isn't too confusing. If you need help, obviously shout. We've got some worksheets. That's just another visual way of looking at it in an up and down timeline, but it's the same thing really. So we have some worksheets, and actually these are really useful. That again, they are really simple, but because you might have half a dozen different objectives and strategies for each of those and tactics for each of those strategies, if you don't have worksheets, this gets really complicated. So I strongly recommend, if you like MOST analysis and you want to work through this. And in terms of where you find all of these tools, they're on our website under the resources section, Business Strategy Toolkit. So it's just there. And how you find the resources, you just go onto our homepage, boardroomadvisors.co or .co.uk, it's both. And you just click on the resources button. When you go to the page itself, hopefully this will scroll in a second. Katie, tell me that's scrolling nicely.
Yeah, I've actually shared it all for you as well, John, on the chat. So okay. Everybody has access to this part of your website.
Okay, excellent. So that's where it is, and you can just access those through. So right, how are we doing for time, Katie? Oh,
are you ready to wrap up? We've got a few questions coming through that I'd love to run through so we can get some interaction going. That would be quite nice.
Let's do exactly that, Katie.
Thank you.
Let me stop sharing for a second and let's tackle some of the questions.
Well, thank you very much, John. That was really insightful and informative presentation. I felt like there was a bit of game of tennis going on there between tactics and strategies. And I thought, wow, it really is about going back, reviewing, implementing, going back, reviewing, implementing until you refine and get it right. So it's quite an interesting process. And I think our participants today are really interested in the SWOT analysis. So I've got a couple of questions. So one question from Anonymous: what successes have you seen with SWOT that have been most surprising, impressive, and inspiring?
Oh, okay, that's a toughie, isn't it? I think sometimes what happens around a table, particularly in let's say a medium-sized company, what is common is that people have their own areas of the business that they're responsible for, and they can see some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in their own area, but they don't necessarily see it overall. And sometimes you get surprises. People say, oh, we've got a perceived, take the example, we've got a perceived financial weakness. And somebody around the table goes, really? But actually we're strong financially. Yes, I didn't say we were weak. We have a perception of weakness. I didn't realize that, really? So how do you know that? And you get surprises like that. And that's quite illuminating. Now, you'd think people would bump into stuff like that, you know, at regular board meetings or even at management meetings, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the tools are useful just in order to flush that stuff out. Another way of answering questions similarly is the surprise sometimes is that sometimes companies have done a SWOT internally themselves. Sometimes they arrive with a SWOT. I've done mine, I brought it here to the meeting. And that's great, but actually you stick it up on the board and you have a facilitator, it's a slightly different game because a facilitator can tease things out. Fred, you said this, it was a perceived weakness, but Jim, you don't know about this weakness. So guys, what's going on here? You know, you do that sort of thing as a, you know, as a third party, as a facilitator, which you can't do on a flat sheet of paper. I don't know, has that answered the question, Katie?
No, that's, I really liked that. There's the perception that's forming, and for people to actually sit down and do this exercise, it brings things to the surface that maybe are being overlooked because there's so much focus on other things in the business. And I think we've had so many bullets being thrown at us in this environment. It's fast change, a lot of transitioning for a lot of businesses. So sitting down and actually going through this exercise would be quite powerful, I think. And John, one of the other questions was, how long should it take for you to facilitate this exercise? Typically, if you're sitting around the table with maybe, say, 4 or 5 people in the senior role or a business owner, how long would you say spending on this is appropriate?
Yeah, the easy answer is as long as it takes. The proper answer is, in an average size business, certainly half a day. Ideally, you want to leave as long as a day, and you want to get off site if you can, because you don't want the interruptions, phone calls, all the rest of it. So, you know, the away day thing is quite useful for that reason. For smaller companies, it can obviously be a shorter period of time because you've got less to go through and less people discussing it. You know, if you've got 3 people talking, or you've got 8 people talking, then, you know, it stretches the time out. It also depends how frequently you're reviewing it. If you're doing it for the first time for a long time, you're going to need more time than if you're doing this on a quarterly basis. I think the other thing to say, it's not quite in the question, but it's useful, I think, is that the very first bit, the mission of MOST, actually probably takes the longest. Because if you've got half a dozen people around the table, they're probably all different ages, they've all got different timelines and personal objectives. You know, Fred wants to sell out in 3 years to cash it in, and Jim's there for the longer haul, and, you know, they've all got different agendas. So it's surprisingly difficult how getting agreement around the table of actually where you want your ship to sail to. But it's vital that you don't move on, that you get agreement before you try and tackle the stuff. Otherwise, you know, let's kill the analogy. The ship's lurching to one side. You can't really travel forward. So crazily, on the, I'm not saying the whole thing will take a whole day, but on the MOST analysis, probably half the time on the MOST analysis, on average, I spend on the mission. Because that's
okay.
Right.
Well, you don't want to end up like the Titanic, do you? So you need to, everyone's talking to everyone around that table. Thank you very much. So it can vary depending on the size of the team, the complexity of the organization, and also the team structure. That's very good to know. One more on SWOT, and then there's a different one. And then I'd like to go to the chat because Kerry's talking about some interesting things. But the next one on SWOT is, in a SWOT post-COVID, the O seems more significant considering market changes. How to evaluate those different opportunities in a fresh way, somewhat unburdened by past paradigms? Question mark.
Okay. Listen, my suggestion, don't overcomplicate it. the situation, COVID is big. It means possibly bigger changes than might otherwise, but there's always something, Brexit's a medium-sized change for us in the UK. COVID's a big change. The financial crisis was a big change, but then, climate, there's lots of things that happen. So don't overcomplicate it. Is what's the situation? What are the objectives? We're getting there from the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Stick to the process, and the process will see you through.
Yeah, doing a few things brilliantly, I think, is the key. You're spot on there. Sometimes it's paralysis by analysis. I know I was speaking to Michael this morning, one of our members, and he says that all the time. I say it all the time, and it is very true. And I think there's something about the threats as well, being able to unearth those and not just always looking at the opportunities. And I liked how you brought that to life in the presentation today. So going away from now SWOT, which I think is really important, and I'm looking forward to everybody, please, you've got the links there to go in and, do a bit of an exercise yourself and see what emerges for you. I think that's a really special exercise to do. We do have another anonymous question. In the transition from data collection to strategy development, how does a company be innovative but realistic?
Well, data, or data as we call it in England, you call it tomato, we call it tomato. Data is really useful. So, how do you know that you've got a perceived weakness in finance? What is the data? Is it anecdotal? Well, that's great. How many people have said this? One. Okay, is that really a thing? So using data in order to help your strategic analysis is good. You want to grow by 50% in 1 year. Well, guys, is that realistic? What did we do last year? What did we do the year before? Again, you're using data. What are our competitors doing? At what level are they growing? How do we find that information? We might have to do a bit of research. So using data in order to help with strategy is useful, and finance and your existing financial position and your financial forecast and your strategy are all kind of joined at the hip, because your history, your financial history, kind of gives you bookends, gives you a reference point. Your financial budget going forward, or forecast, is partly dependent on the strategy. Those two are totally interchangeable. Which comes first, chicken or the egg, the strategy or the forecast? You kind of have to work those two together. So yeah, they're very much joined at the hip, I think.
Yeah, very much so. And we were having a bit of a chat in the group chat whilst you were going through that, and some of the challenges that some of us are facing around sort of the visas and shipping and just the obstructions that we're facing. And Kerry was just sharing some of the ways he's overcoming that. And it's about how we interact with our clients going forward. Have you got anything about how you're working with teams to adjust their engagement model to suit the new norm?
Yeah, I think that comes back to the crisis assessment tool, and that's just evaluating almost every level of what you do. Is it going to be the same? Do you have to adjust it? How much do you have to adjust it? Is it a tweak? Is it a big pivot? It's just looking through everything that you do, and again, keep it simple. What is it that you do? Write it down in words of one syllable. We supply these 10 countries. We supply them with these 3 products. Okay, that's good. Nice and simple. Now, given COVID and given the changes, you mentioned shipping and currency and these sort of things, well, actually, is all that going to be the case? Well, actually, of your 10 countries, perhaps 8 are going to go faster, quicker, bigger. Perhaps 2 are going to completely stop, and actually you need to replace those with others. So I think at every point, the point I'm trying to get across is points. Keep strategy really simple. If you're not sure, write it down in really simple terms, and then analyze it, poke it, but don't perhaps overanalyze it. I always used to say with maths problems, or math as they call it in the States, If a situation is presented to you, a mathematical problem, and it's really complicated, well, just write it down with really simple numbers, and then the answer becomes obvious. And it's kind of I think it's similar with strategy. Write down in very simple terms what it is that you do, who you do it for, and then check that it's still going to be valid in the current situation.
Yeah, a really good response. And yeah, it is about just going back to that strategy, isn't it? And rethinking it and evolving it. We do have one more question from Kerry Chislett. Welcome, Kerry. John, how do you suggest inviting a subject matter expert like your team to a meeting whilst maintaining confidentiality? That's a really good question.
Oh, the simple answer is you get them to sign a confidentiality agreement or an NDA. You know, that's the simple way in which case they're bound not to do that. Any professional firm worth their salt is not going to reveal secrets in the marketplace, but that's a way of legally making sure.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, John. Now, John, Doug's just put a note here. He was just using the analysis form, but it's not working for non-UK numbers. Do you have another option we can share at the end?
Oh, okay. For non-UK numbers.
Doesn't let you skip over that question either. It's like a must do. I know we've got quite a few international people on the call today. So how about what we do is we take an action away, John, that we'll get something out that they can connect with you on. I think it's really important that everyone can look, feel and touch with what you do. And so I think, you know, and also John will be coming back again for our next part of the summer series, guys, for the 1st of July for the Scale Up Challenges. I'm really looking forward to that one, John. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time and your support with the Global Chamber here in London and giving us all of this amazing guidance from your experience over the years and working with businesses.
That's very kind.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. I look forward to the next one. Also, just while I'm talking about next and upcoming events, I'm very excited, and maybe you might join us, John. Next Thursday, Maria from Denver Global Chamber is holding a global dining cuisine night where we're all going to be sharing, you know, what we're eating, and it's actually about British cuisine. So I'm going to be there. It's a really lovely way to connect and do some networking. It's really enjoyable. And I'm going to be on there. I'd love for the guys on today to come along and have dinner with us next Thursday at 6 o'clock. You can see these details on the events page. Also, 29th of June, we have Michael Quigley. He's going to be talking about communication. And I think just following on from what you were doing today, John, I think it's going to be even more important for us these days to communicate well within our businesses. So I'm looking forward to the upcoming events, especially the extension of the Summer Business Series. And for those of you who are new to Global Chamber and visiting us, I'd just like to say thank you very much. And if you are wanting to know more about Global Chamber, we're the first and only Chamber of Commerce located in hundreds of metros right around the globe. We are literally everywhere. And if you are a leader who seeks additional growth for your company beyond just one metro area, join us to connect and grow and leverage off the global tribe. There are endless opportunities. We get you and we are here to help. So don't be shy. Reach out to me. My name is Katie Keith, Exec Director for London. We've got many people around the world who will be happy to take your call. Reach out to John as well. Thank you for your time and your support. And I wish you all a lovely evening.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, John. Good night, everybody.